Our episode begins on the stormy world of Kamino. A squad of clone commandos had just finished their training. This squad was getting ready to be shipped to the front lines. The Kaminoan in charge of their training told them to return to their rooms. There was a mission statement being sent to them, instructing each of them what their goal was. The recorded transmission was coming in from Commander Cody. Currently, Commander Cody was on the front lines, waiting out the Sith Empire. Combat had ceased, and Cody was sending this message to the Commandos so that they could go to Tython and do some reconnaissance for the Republic. The four clone commandos split up and walked into their own respective rooms, which were all layered in next to each other. The leader of the group walked into his own quarters. His name was Zan. He walked into the room and sat his helmet down on his bed as he sat down next to it. The message from Cody popped up, and out came the message informing him of what the squad would be doing. Commander Cody informed Zan that his job was to exclusively go to the planet Tython for a reconnaissance mission. He was not to engage the enemy. Cody reinforced this by referring to Zan and his man as rookies. Their job was simply to get a readout and see if there were any survivors of the attack on the base. There was no reason to engage. Cody also continued by informing that if all the clones were dead, there was a clone captain present who had all the information that hadn't been transmitted back to the Republic. The information that the clone captain had could be very informative to the war effort, so if the commandos got a hold of that information, they needed to get out immediately. Zan watched as the communication came to an end before him. Zan made a personal note to himself to make sure that he did everything in his power to avoid any conflict. A small holomap came through the comlink from Commander Cody. It showed the entire layout of the entire facility. It also revealed the location of a hidden cave within the temple. Zan looked at everything and took it in. As the commander of his squad, he had to be very analytical and informed, but these were attributes that belonged to him naturally. In the next door, Burst walked into his room, as they kicked the hologram as it turned on, and the mission statement from Commander Cody came in. Cody informed Burst that as a squad sniper, it was his job to ensure that the Sith troopers didn't get a hold of them. He had to scout out the majority of the area before they went in. Burst was also the pilot of the squad. Well, all the commandos could pilot, but Burst was the designated pilot, and he was the best of the four. Cody told Burst that he was to land way beyond the reaches of the mountain range. They'd be departing from Kamino at 0700. Per the calculations, they would be able to arrive at Tython in the middle of the night and land on the dark side of the planet. They could traverse the jungle and get to the ground while the Sith army wasn't fully awake or fully prepared. Cody was under the assumption that the Sith Empire had deployed a fleet, which was far from the truth. The Sith came in transports, and so the clone squad wouldn't have to worry about a fleet to avoid. Burst understood the mission, as Cody told him to avoid combat at all costs. He understood the mission that sat before him. The door beside Burst was occupied by a squad mate, Red Eye. This clone commando was a bit more of a tech-savvy individual, and his personality revolved around intelligence. He was hyper-focused on taking advantage of the most advantageous situation he was presented with. Red Eye got his nickname for his inability to rest. He was someone who stayed up most nights possible. He didn't slow down and he studied everything. The message that he got from Cody was very similar to the message that was sent to Zan, but this message included important locations to check inside the Jedi Temple on Tython. Of course, Zan got all this information, but the type of locks on the doors, the material used, and all the other analytical data that might be important went to Red Eye. Cody ended the message showing each of the control ports inside of the Jedi Temple, given over by the Jedi. The mission was really clear to Red Eye, and so he lay down after taking his gear off. The final clone was a bit of a psycho. He was quiet, but he also loved the thrill of combat. He stormed into his room, throwing his backpack to the side and turned on the hollow transmitter. The message came in from Commander Cody and addressed the clone as Flame. That was his nickname. Flame dropped his helmet and waited for the orders. Cody informed Flame of the same mission details, but told him especially that this mission was a covert op. It was not meant to blow anything up or everything up in sight. His primary focus was to keep quiet. There would be no reason to be blowing anything up in this mission. If he did, the entire mission could crash down into a failure. Zan would fill him in on any questions he might have. Flame turned off the communicator before rolling his eyes and speaking quietly to himself about how their first op was going to be a wasteful mission sneaking around. Flame understood the importance of commando work, but he did like to get into firefights. He specialized in the combat area, and he was an enthusiast of all types of combat. He was one of the more Mandalorian-like commandos, hyper-focused on the aspect of combat rather than the importance of recon. Regardless, the day would pass in the night, and the clones would have their mission. In the morning, they would be loading out Zan woke his squad up an hour before deployment so they could make sure everything was ready to go. Zan was a bit of an over-worrier. His focus on his mission, of course, was important to him, but he stressed out about being on time with everything. It was a type of precision that no one could really program into him. Burst and Red-Eye were ready to go, while Flame showed some reluctance for the excitement of their first mission. To an extent, Zan understood, but he also knew that they were soldiers. What they wanted had to come after what they needed to do. Zan picked up the motivation and instructed the boys to get to the ship and be ready for liftoff. They were leaving soon. The other three got to work, but Flame was busy putting explosives and larger weapons into the shuttle. For example, the rotary blaster cannon. It was essentially a battalion of clones and a gun. As a commando, their primary weapon was a DC-17M, but Flame liked to have extra accessories. While yes, the DC-17M had plenty of accessories, like a scope, a grenade launcher, and even some other abilities, Flame preferred to lug around extra weaponry, because he was just extra. Zan noticed the weapon stashed inside the vessel and reminded Flame that this was a reconnaissance mission, to which Flame looked at the squad leader and told him that he understood. He was just staying prepared. Zan turned away and prepared his squad to load up and lift off. Within the hour, everything was ready, and Burst jumped into the cockpit and took off. Kamino was as rainy as ever, and the squad of clones departed for Tython. When the ship entered hyperspace, Zan gathered a group up in the center of the cargo area. He pulled out a hologram and made a point to pick out each strategic landing point for them. There were mountains in the quadrant that they were landing in, but there were also to be expected several troops present. When they landed, their first job was to scout out everything below the mountain, see if they could pinpoint any strategic locations that weren't on the holomap, and see if there were any identifiable leaders of the Sith army, and how many estimated troops there were on the ground. The men were all ready, and they were well prepared. Though it would be remiss to mention that nerves were also high. These were no longer the simulations. These rookies were going to be reconning a battlefield where nearly 600 men and 2 Jedi had gone missing from. There was confirmation that the Jedi had been killed, but the number of clones that survived had not yet been revealed. Eventually, the shuttle exited hyperspace. Red-Eye sat in the co-pilot's seat as he called out to Zan to report that there weren't any larger ships appearing on the radar. Zan nodded his head as he told them to keep their frequencies quiet, just to be safe. If the Sith had left, then it would make their mission a lot easier. That was the assumption, too. It seemed as if the Sith came here for a raid and abandoned everything. Flame sat in the cockpit quietly. He looked over the holomap for anything else that might have been missed. The night was dark as the Republic shuttle rounded the planet, making its way for the trees and landing behind a mountain range. The clones all immediately deployed. Zan told Red-Eye and Flame to scout out the lower area and remember to not engage with any troopers unless necessary. Zan and Burst were going to climb the mountain and scout out the area below. The ascent began. It wasn't too difficult. The clone commanders were equipped with numerous tools that their brothers in the regular army didn't get. As the clones scaled the mountain, Zan pointed Burst to a grouping of bushes and trees. The clones both set up in the bushes as Zan pulled out the hollow binoculars as Burst ready to scope and line it up, of course making sure that the safety was still on. Burst reported that there were 24 troopers marching around. Zan noted that in front of the Jedi Temple, there was a shirtless individual walking around with a lightsaber attached to his belt. Burst moved his scope around and noticed that on the grounds of the facility there were 15 guards standing post, though they didn't look like they were all too focused. On the front steps, the apparent Sith was talking to an apparent commander of this force. Zan moved his binoculars up and scouted the mountain range. He took note of the fact that the mountains seemed to be empty. Burst moved his reticle up and noticed that the same thing. The two started talking about their best entry possible. Zan took down his binoculars and pulled up a holomap on his wrist, and noted that if the clones opened up a small hole in the top of the facility, then he'd be able to drop into the Jedi Temple and move around relatively freely. Burst agreed that it was a good idea. Though Burst took his reticle down and looked over, there was no clear way to get across the mountains behind the Jedi Temple. The only way would be to descend, cross a river twice, and then scale a mountain right next to the 15 guards. Zan took note of that as he got out of the bushes and crouched his way towards the edge of the mountains. Burst followed his squad leader as they moved behind a grouping of trees and stood up. Zan lifted his rifle and told Burst that they had the ability to zipline across over to the other mountain range, though the issue is how they could do it without being seen or caught, considering Republic Commando gear was shiny and white. Burst admitted that it would be a difficult thing to do, but they needed to make a decision now, because the sun would rise in nearly 80 minutes. Zan called over his comlink and reported to Red-Eye and Flame and told them to scale the mountain. They'd be ziplining across to the other mountain range. Zan also made a note to tell the squad to only bring what was necessary, because too much weight could cause them to fall to their deaths and alert the presence of the Sith. Inside the Jedi Temple, one of the Sith troopers was picking up the frequency and alerted his commander that there was someone on the planet trying to communicate. He wasn't sure if the communication was going off-world or not. The commander told the trooper to block all communications going anywhere, as he ran to tell Sion about it. While Burst and Zan were waiting for Red-Eye and Flame to make their way up the top of the mountain, Burst told Zan that a trooper just ran from the Jedi Temple to tell the Sith Lord something. The moment the news reached Sion, he whipped his head around and let out a terrible scream. He told the commander to storm the caves and kill all the survivors, before turning around and yelling out to the men marching around to fan out and see if there was anyone else on the planet. The 4 commanders realized that their presence was noticed. Zan told the squad that the 15 men they were ziplining over would now be on guard. They had to do this quickly. The sun was going to be rising very soon. The dark night began to light up, and there were streaks of dark blue making themselves visible to the planet, and so the clones began to run, crouching as they did, picking up pace as Burst got to the edge of the mountain range as he lowered his rifle, attached a cable to it, and silenced his weapon, before shooting a blast that popped out of his rifle across the canyon as it crashed into the side of the mountain, latching on. Zan told Red-Eye to go first. He could make sure everyone got over there safely. Red-Eye hopped onto the zipline as he began to speed across the canyon, flying above the Sith troopers. Zan tapped Flame on the back, pushing him forwards towards the zipline, as he too hopped on. Zan told Burst that he was next. Burst looked at him and asked about him. Zan told him to go, he would be right behind. Burst hopped onto the zipline as it shot him all the way across the canyon. Though Burst lost control towards the end and dropped off the zipline as he crashed down into a tree. The 15 men were alerted to this as they all turned and looked towards the tree area. Burst hit himself as best as he could. His boot was stuck and he was in a very awkward position. Luckily, when he crashed down, he startled a bunch of birds that called Tython home as they all jumped out of the tree, tripping as they did. The men below noted that the birds were likely startled by a predator, and they turned their attention away. Zan held his breath as he got onto the zipline as he followed it down to the other mountain range. About halfway through, the zipline caught and jammed, almost throwing him from the zipline to his death. Luckily, he had a good enough grip to hold on. He looked around and climbed up to the top of the zipline and started to push his way across the canyon to the mountain where his squad was. Burst, during this time, was able to quietly get himself out of the tree and down to his squad mates. By the time he did, Zan was climbing down. The clones quickly moved around the side of the mountain as the sun slowly creeped up. The clones made their way for the side of the building and climbed down. Zan pulled up the holo map and made a readout of where they were supposed to cut. Burst took note of the fact that the Sith had apparently disappeared. Zan told Burst to stay up high and keep a readout on everything. He was to signal them by tapping on his wrist. The commando squad had an alert button. It didn't require a communication device, but Zan told Burst to tap once if he saw the Sith, or tap twice if it seemed like there was a disturbance. Burst nodded his head and climbed up onto the top of the mountain. At the same time, Flame used a torch to open up a hole in the side of the Jedi Temple. The 3 clones used all their strength to pull the piece of steel out of the temple and place it down gently without making too much noise. The hole was small, but it would only be noticeable within the next 2 hours when the sun finally rose above the temple. They needed to get in and get out as soon as possible. The clones dropped down into a room in the upper half of the Jedi Temple. There were a bunch of chairs gathered around, and at the end was a door. There were very few windows, and most of the chairs had been turned upside down. Zan told Red-Eye to get to the door and open it quietly. They just wanted to breach the door enough to slide through the gap, not fully open it. Red-Eye got onto it. As he did, Zan and Flame looked at the map again and found the communication room. It was just down the hallway from where they were. It would be worth getting there so that they could open up communications with Burst so he could communicate a little bit more freely. When Red-Eye got the door open, the 3 clones moved outside. They formed up behind Zan. The commander of the squad led them as they all rounded the corner and ran up the set of stairs and looked down a hallway. The hallway looked empty, but there was nowhere to take cover. Footsteps could be heard though. Flame looked up and identified 20 troopers walking down the steps. Flame knew that they could take them, as did Red-Eye and Zan, but they were under orders to stay quiet. The commandos ran forward and kept as quiet as they could. The marching of the Sith troopers masked their sound as they made their way to the communication room. Zan told Red-Eye to open the door and cut the power to the room, as he turned to Flame and told him to prepare to put his night vision on. Zan instructed the men to use their hands and their vibroblades exclusively. They didn't want to alert anybody to their presence. Red-Eye got onto the control panel, pushing every button he could, severing the power from the room, turning the lights out, though the door wouldn't open. Zan looked over, insinuating that they didn't have time to hold this out. Red-Eye got a little flustered, but the sounds of boots marching down towards them put his mind into a state of terror. If he didn't get this open right now, then the mission would be compromised, and they would be found by the Sith. Flame told Red-Eye to get it right. The first Sith trooper could be seen at the end of the hallway. Flame and Zan lifted their blasters up as Zan told Flame to be steady. The door shot open as Red Eye stopped it before it could audibly slam into the hinges. Zan pushed Flame and Red Eye into the room before shutting the door. There were Sith troopers on the inside of the room looking around, trying to figure out how to turn anything back on. They were alerted to the door opening and closing. Zan slammed the panel to make sure that he locked it. Before turning on his night vision, Red Eye and Flame fanned out across the room. When Zan turned around, there were 2 Sith troopers closing in on his position. They didn't know he was there, but they were going towards the door. Zan saw this mild inconvenience as something he couldn't escape, but he was a commando after all. As he planted a cable onto his weapon and shot it into the ceiling as he lifted up above the 2 Sith troopers just in time. At the same time, Flame wrapped his arm around a Sith trooper's neck before using his vibro blade to silence him. On the other side of the room, Red Eye used his knife to strike down 2 men, cutting both in the neck, instantly killing them. Though, as he tried to catch both of them, one of them slammed into the ground. The 2 men below Zan heard it and turned around, asking if the others were alright. They heard no response. Zan dropped down, snapping the neck of one of the men before tackling the other and killing him with a quick blow to the neck. Zan called out in a whisper to hide the bodies. There was a ventilation shaft on the near side of the room that they could use. Flame asked about the vent on the far side of the room. Zan told him that it would be an escape route out of the room if they needed it. Zan told Red Eye to program the computer terminal to not recognize the communication devices. This would allow the Sith to continue to monitor communications on the planet, but they wouldn't specifically pick up on the commando squad's frequency. Red Eye got to work as a sound of marching slowly passed by the room. The clones finished hiding the bodies as the communication array was turned back on. The clones quickly ran towards the other vent and left the room looking perfectly clean, with the lights back on and everything. As the clones climbed in, Zan contacted Burst and told him that their communications were online. They could reach each other through their comlinks if they needed to. Burst acknowledged and then reported that it seemed as if there was a disturbance. There were Sith troopers abandoning their positions. Zan wondered what it could be, but then the sound of an explosion rocked the Jedi Temple. Zan reported to Burst that they didn't know what that was. Then the sound of clones calling out orders could be heard. Zan told the men to take advantage of this moment. They looked around and dropped out of the ceiling down onto another level below. They moved into the corner of the hallways as the sound of a lightsaber ignited. Zan looked down both hallways. Down one side was a group of 40 or so men that came running down. Zan looked at Flame and told him to do what he does best. Flame smiled, and from within his helmet, as he called out Formation 391, he ran over to the side of the wall and threw a thermal detonator. The Sith troopers all looked up when they saw the clone commandos. They were a little confused until the thermal detonator exploded at their feet, sending nearly 20 men across the room in shambles. The clones opened fire. Zan kept an eye on their 6 as the 2 commanders cut down the Sith troopers. Zan called out to the men. They were being surrounded. The 20 men that were marching around earlier came barreling down around the corner. Zan shot the first shot, bullseye, as it passed through 2 of the Sith troopers' heads. Red Eye and Flame turned around after the smoke cleared, and the last of the Sith troopers were downed. The 2 commandos moved from side to side to adjust to the blaster fire opening up upon them. The clones put down the 20 men without suffering a casualty or even a hit. Zan called up to Burst and told him to begin firing on the Sith troopers. Burst took the order in and aimed towards the 15 guards. Red Eye asked Zan why they were going all in on this. Zan told them that there were clones still alive. They could save their brothers, then cutting off reinforcements would be the best way to do it. The commandos ran to the stairs in front of them as they looked down. It was empty, but the sound of blaster fire in the distance riddled across the hallways as it echoed. Red Eye suggested that the blaster fire might be coming from the caverns below the temple. Zan nodded his head as it began to run down towards the stairs. From above, blaster fire came raining down, and then, below, a good 15 men started firing at the commandos. Zan pushed Red Eye and Flame down behind the railing as he was clipped in the chest and sent back into the wall. Red Eye looked over and saw that Zan was heavily damaged. He told Flame to give him cover fire as he jumped over to his squad leader and shoved some back into his veins. Zan tried to get Red Eye to get the cover, but to him, his brother mattered more. Flame attached the grenade launcher to his rifle as he shot at the staircase above where the Sith troopers were. The stairs crumbled out from below the troopers as they fell down to the ground, along with hundreds of pounds of debris, as they toppled down on top of the Sith troopers on the bottom level that were shooting up at them. With the Bacta starting to kick in Zan, he thanked his men. Before they could do anything else though, Burst sent in a communication to them. There were about 200 soldiers emerging from the forest. Burst told them that he was going to take cover. It turns out him sniping the men on the ground alerted them to his presence. They were all hidden in the trees at a very far away campsite, which would explain why the clones never saw them when they scouted the area. Zan told Burst to prepare to get into contact in case they needed to evac. Burst took his orders as he moved away from the face of the mountain to get into cover. Inside the Jedi Temple, the sounds of blaster fire were getting closer. The clone commandos looked over the balcony. When they looked down, they saw 5 clones running away. None of them were Captain Keeley, but they were all panicked. They killed the Sith troopers, and then behind them was a Sith Lord. They cried out, shooting behind them as Cyan knocked the blaster bolt away from himself as he swung towards them, missing. Then Cyan was shot in the side by Red Eye. Cyan stopped in his tracks as he turned his attention towards the clones on the stairs. He screamed angrily as he looked at the clones. Flame called out Red Eye for pissing off Ugly before Zan told him to run up the stairs. The clones started running as Cyan lunged across the room, slamming through the railing and cutting up the stairs behind the clones. Flame asked why they were going up, as Zan told them to use escape code 14. Red Eye acknowledged this as he placed a cable on his rifle, as did Flame. The 3 clones kept on climbing as Cyan lunged up the stairs after stair, trying to kill the clones. Red Eye and Flame prepared as they got to the top where the stairs were missing and jumped off. Zan was right behind them until Cyan jumped up and slammed down on his back, and though he grabbed him, he missed with his lightsaber. Zan looked up, seeing the ugly face of Cyan before making sure that his men got down. Zan threw a punch into Cyan's jaw, pissing off the Sith Lord even more. As the Sith Lord raised his lightsaber up, the clones on the ground began shooting their blaster fire, clipping Cyan's weapon, throwing it from his hands, as Zan kicked Cyan in the stomach before climbing up the stairs and jumping down. Zan snapped his cable on at the last second while falling, shooting it into the stairs and swinging to the ground. He looked at his squad mates and gestured for them to follow him. He asked where the regs were. The others didn't know as they followed him. Cyan leapt down and slammed onto the ground, creating a shockwave that threw the commandos from their feet. The clones flew into a wall and then heard one of their brothers call out to them, telling them to get to them now. Cyan whipped his lightsaber down the hallway as the clones ducked. The lightsaber barely missed as the commandos got up and started running towards the clone trooper that called to them. He was inside the caverns, and he directed the clone commandos forward into a small hole in the cave. It led to an abandoned training room. Zan told the men to shoot the ceiling, and as they did, it collapsed just before Cyan got to them. The 5 clones that were saved by the commandos in the initial hallway continued running out of the temple as they were met with the blaster fire of 200 Sith troopers. The blaster fire cut through them and killed them instantly, before they could even defend themselves. The commandos looked around. They didn't acknowledge the clones in their midst, because with this tunnel sealed, they would run out of air, or the Sith would get to them before they went anywhere. Zan contacted Burst and told them to get in contact with the clone commanders of the Jedi and informed them of the predicament. Burst took the orders in and reached out for Commander Cody as fast as he could. When the commandos realized they were trapped, they looked over. 15 of the 600 men stationed here had survived, and luckily, one of those survivors was Captain Keeley. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is part 5 of 6. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth, Cheesy, Apollo, Mad Benny Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video. You know what's coming next. I'm excited. I hope you like this. This is heating up. Got the finale next week, and I really hope you guys like the finale. I really hope you guys like this episode. All I want to say about this, my only antidote towards this, is that I liked this one because it was kind of like a Republic Commando. So, you know, whoever grew up playing Republic Commando like I did, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so this was fun for that reason. So anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.